Hello, welcome back to my ICE tutorial programming series. This is going to be episode 4, and we're picking up right where we left off, even though it's been a while. So today we're going to be talking about the while and repeat loop, and maybe some other loops. We'll have to see if we have time. Okay. So we talked about conditionals last episode, which, just as a refresher, was the argument part of the if statement. So we said if, and then we gave it an argument, say a is greater than 5. So this a is greater than 5 part is the conditional. Okay, so we use a conditional as an argument for an if statement, but we can also use it as an argument for loops. And what loops are segments of code that continuously repeat for a given length of time, depending on your arguments and stuff like that. And different loops do different things. So the first loop that we'll look at is a while loop. And this loop will repeat while something is true. So we have to put in our while token and our argument. Let's say a is greater than 5. And then we need an end token, and just like an if statement where you can have any amount of code, any amount of lines of code in between the if and the end, and it's all contained. That's what the loop does. So I can have 3 lines of code or 10 or 1 inside this while statement, and it's all, as long as it's between the end and the while, it's valid. Okay. So we haven't gone over different variable types in ICE yet, but the store arrow, which is the STO and the arrow key right above the on button on your calculator, you can use that to store a value into a variable. So if we do 10 stored in A, that means that A is now 10. Okay, and we're just going to use this to test out our loop. So we have while a is greater than 5. Now, what this will do is it'll take our code and it will continuously repeat it, starting at the top and ending at the bottom, and it'll just keep looping through that and then restarting at the top, as long as a is greater than 5. So right now, 10 is what a is. A is greater than 5. 10 is greater than 5, so it would do all this code. So let's display our value. Let's display a. And then let's just pause and let's clear home then. Okay. So what this should do is it should run through values of a. As long as we're within this loop, it'll just continuously show us what a is, and then we pause and it shows us a again. And because we want this loop to exit at some point, right, while a is greater than 5, this will just loop forever, and we have no way of exiting this. So the problem is, if you don't put in an exit condition or have a way to reach the exit condition, your loop's going to run forever, and you're going to have to reset your calculator. Clear the RAM. So that's why you want to archive things on your calculator. But if you do loop and you don't have an exit condition, the button on the back, the reset button, you'll have to push that in with the tip of a pencil or something, and it'll clear everything that wasn't archived, which isn't fun. Okay, so we want to have a way to reach this exit condition. So we need to make a less than or equal to 5 so that the while statement isn't true. Well, to do that, we just need to start decreasing a. So if we take a and we subtract 1, we want to store that back into a. So now a is going to equal its old value minus 1. Okay? So let's run that and see what we get. Okay, so a is 10. We hit enter. It's 9, 8, 7, 6. Okay, it stopped at 6, and now the program's done. So why did it stop at 6? Well, A came into the loop being 10. Well, A was greater than 5, it showed us what A was, and it paused, then it cleared and it decreased A and started all over. So it kept running through this, and A was getting smaller every time. Well, when A equaled 6, it displayed it, so we saw A equaled 6. We pushed enter to get through that pause, and then it decreased A by 1, so now A was 5. Went back up to the top and it said 5 is not greater than 5. So it skipped the loop and went down to the pause, and so that exited the loop. Okay. Now the thing about while loops is that they won't run at all if that condition isn't met. So say A is equal to 3, okay? So the program runs, it gets to the clear home, it clears home, and then it says, well, A is greater than 5. Well, 3 is not greater than 5, so it doesn't even show us A once. It just immediately skips past the loop. And let's just make sure that's the case. And it is. It doesn't show us A. Okay, so that's a while loop. And you can see how this would be super useful, right? Because so far we've talked about pause, which means that nothing can really happen while the screen is paused, right? All you can do is hit enter, but the screen is frozen like a picture. But if you want to make a game or something, right? You need to have a way so that it doesn't exit the program immediately, right? But you don't want to pause, because if it's a pause, then you can't move a character around, say. So that's why you have a loop, because a loop allows you to still be changing what's on the screen, but since it's still looping, since it's going back to the beginning of the loop, it's not progressing forward to the end of the program. So that's why you'd want to have different loops, and different loops can do different things. Let's talk about repeat. Repeat is very interesting, and it's sort of like a while loop, but it's a little different, and we'll see how. So a repeat loop repeats until the condition is true. So instead of, for a while loop, the condition had to be true for the code to execute. With a repeat, the code has to be false, the argument, your conditional. If this conditional is true, then the repeat loop won't run. If it's false, then it will. And once again, we can have our end statement and as many lines of code inside as we want, which will keep getting repeated. Now, the one different thing, though, not besides the thing where the conditional is actually false, repeat loops will always run once. Whereas while loops, you saw if the condition wasn't true, then the while loop didn't even run once. With a repeat loop, even if the condition is true, because remember, repeat loops won't execute if the condition is true. Even if that condition is true, it will run through the loop once, which is very helpful in some circumstances, and we'll talk about those probably at a future time when we talk about get key, maybe. So we have, let me just show you this. Okay, so A is 0. We're going to show A, and we're going to increase A, and then we're going to see what happens. So let's compile this. Okay, so A is 0, A is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it's done. So why did that happen? Well, A was continuously increased, and it kept looping through until A was 5. And then we got to this A plus 1. So we saw that A was 5, that was the display. And then A was increased by 1, and it became 6. Well, when we got to this repeat until a is greater than 5. So repeat until 6 is greater than 5. 6 was greater than 5, which is why it exited. It didn't exit before when a was 5, because 5 isn't greater than 5. And because 5 isn't greater than 5, this is false, and this is a repeat until something is true. That's very important. So we saw that. Now, what if we put a as 6 in the beginning, which means that this statement is true, which means, remember, the repeat loop won't repeat, but it should run through once, because remember, repeat loops run at least once. So we see that a is 6. Even though 6 is greater than 5, it still showed us that once. But it won't do it anymore, because after that first time, it's not true. Okay, so that's repeat loops. And because I have a little more time, I think we can do for loops. So I'm going to clear everything for this, because this is going to be a slightly different type of loop. Okay. So we need for loops, which all these loops are in the program menu. If you hit program while you're in a program, these will come up. And 4 is the number 4. I don't always use the program menu. You see I use the catalog a lot, which is a bad habit, but sometimes it's easier for me. So just like the other loops, you need the for statement, and then you have your end. All this code in between, it can be as many lines as you want, as few lines as you want, and it's all contained inside that for statement. Okay? Now, the arguments for a for loop are quite different from the other types of loops. A for loop is if you want to repeat things a certain number of times, right? So a while loop and a repeat loop they could repeat an infinite number of times, or 50 times, or 100 times, but you don't know how many times they're going to repeat, which is why you use it, right? Because they'll keep going until the condition is true. For a for loop, it repeats a set number of times, and it changes a variable for each of those times, right? So the first argument we need to put in this for loop is a variable. I'm going to use variable a. It could be variable b, variable c, any variable you want. Then we need a comma. Now we need a starting value for a. So I'll just say 0 for a. Okay? Now we need an ending value for a. And let's say 5. And then we need to do what the variable will increase by. So if we want it to increase by 1, we'd put a 1. If you're increasing the variable by 1, that's already assumed. So a for loop, it assumes that you'll increase it by 1. So if you just leave it like this, that's fine. You take your a, it says we want variable a. We want to start at 0 and we want to end at 5. And it assumes that your increase value is 1. So you don't have to put increase by 1. But what if we want to increase by 2? So we wanted to go from 0 to 6 and increase by 2. So then we'd need to put a 2 in. But by default, it increases by 1. Now, what do I mean by increase? Well, it's going to run through the for loop, and when it gets to 4, so it'll start here, start at the 4, it goes through this code, and it starts back at the beginning, just like other loops do. Except when the first time the loop is run, it takes the starting value and it sets a equal to 0. The loop runs, and then it increments a. So now a would be 1 after running once. It started at 0, now it's 1, runs through, increments it by 1, and that's our increment value. If we incremented it by 2, a would start at 0, it would run through once, and now a would be 2. It would run through once, a would be 4, right? So once a is equal to 5 then, so a is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then it gets set to 5. It runs through when a is 5, and then it exits the loop. So to show you that, let's display a and pause, and then clear home. So we're going to compile that. Okay, so A is 0, A is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we remember we said we start A at 0 and we end at 5. So let's run through all of those, 0 through 5. So when we hit enter again, it should stop. And now it's done. Now what if we change the increment value? What if we want A from 0 to, let's say, 30, and let's do it by 3. And actually, let's set it to 15 so it isn't as long. All right, so A is going to start at 0, and it's going to end at 15, and it's going to increase by 3 every time it runs through. Okay, so we compile that, and now we run program A. So it starts at 0. Now it's 3. We're going to increment by 3 again, so it should be 6, 9, 12, and 15, and now it's done because it reached 15. Okay. So that's for loops. And for loops can be used to do things like animations and stuff like that. So maybe I'll show you this real quick, just because this is a cool use of for loops. And I haven't shown many practical uses for a lot of these things yet because we sort of need more to have practical uses, right? We need to learn about get key and more graphics things before we can really put all this together. So I'm just going to show you this. So let's take A. Let's go from 0 to 9. And then let's output a asterisk at 1, comma A. Okay, and actually let's say 1 through 5. Okay, so we'll have 5 asterisks on the screen. And we can pause milliseconds here. So let's pause 500. Okay, so what did I just do? So I just wrote all this out. Okay, so we're going to clear home at first. Now we have a for loop. And we're using A inside the for loop. So we're going to run through this for loop 5 times. And A is going to start at 1 and end at 5. We're using A as a value in our output. So we know that output puts a character on the screen. And instead of putting the character on the screen at a fixed place, we're going to put it at a value that's set by A. We're using A as one of the coordinates for placing the character. So the place we place the character in will change every time through the loop because A is changing. We put a number after pause because we don't want to hit enter and have it continue, but we want it to continue automatically, so it's like an animation. So when I run this program, I won't have to hit enter. It'll automatically run through and place these, hopefully not too quickly, and we'll be able to see it. So this pause has no number after it, so I have to hit enter to continue the program. If you put 500, it means it'll be 500 milliseconds that it pauses for, and then it'll continue automatically. You don't have to hit enter. So let's watch this. This should be a cool, not really a cool, but an animation. Okay, so invalid expression. Let's see what that was. Let's go to. Okay, so it's an incorrect use of output. I would assume that we confused our argument placement. So let's try this instead. I know in TI Basic, I believe it's the other way around, which might be why I was confused by that. In ICE, it appears to be like this. Let me just check that. No, okay. So I did completely have the syntax messed up. Okay. So here are our coordinates, and here is our output. Okay. So we'll compile that. And you can see I didn't hit enter, but we got 5 asterisks outputted. And it was outputting at a different place every time because we had A be a different value. And there was a pause in between each one being outputted because we put 500 millisecond pause in there. So that's just an example of how you could use a for loop to create a little animation. But it wouldn't have to be just 5 asterisks. You could use the entire screen. And this was 500 milliseconds in between each asterisk. You could do 0, which would be really fast. So that looked slow, but you could make it really fast. And that's just one example of how I could use a for loop. But there's lots of other things that I'd use a for loop for. So I'm going to start going over variables and get key in the next few videos. And we're going to tie those in with loops, and you'll be able to see how we can do really, really cool things with loops. So that's all I have for this episode. Thanks for watching.